Hi everyone, welcome to Keg That's YouTube channel. I recently went to the Czech Republic to drink beer and listen to heavy metal, and both were highly successful. Czech Republic is actually one of my favourite places to go and drink because not only is the mainstream lagers there just really good and on a different level to anything else, the craft beer there is just so well done as well, and whatever you want they have in terms of beer. But one beer stood out really well to me, and that is the dark lager. I've been before to the Czech Republic and I've really enjoyed the dark lager that I've had there, but I've never actually tried brewing it myself. So now that I'm back home, I feel really encouraged to try my own black lager, or as they call it there, cherney. However, Czech dark lager is a BJCP style. I'm not really keeping to that though. This is probably going to be more of a, actually more like a German Schwarzbier, just because of the yeast that I have available, but it's still going to be really nice, and this is still the way to brew a dark lager. It's pretty much done the same way as a regular lager, but there's a couple of differences. One of them, which I'm actually going to do, is I'm going to do a pressurized fermentation as well. I've never done a pressurized lager fermentation, so I'm quite excited to see how that goes. But also during the brew day, there's going to be one change, and I'm going to walk you through that. So the recipe is 4 kilograms of lager malt, or Pilsner malt, 500 grams of Munich malt, 400 grams of dextrin malt, and then 100 grams each of black and chocolate malt. What we're going to do is we're going to mash in all the malts apart from the black and chocolate malt. And we're going to have a regular mash. I'm mashing in at 69 degrees because I want this to have quite a bit of body. And we're just going to do the mash normally, and we're keeping the dark malts aside for now. Now, once the mash is complete, including the mash out, so just before the sparge, we're then going to lift up this top plate here and scatter in the dark malts. And then we're just going to carry on the sparge as normal. And as you will see, the wort is going to get darker and darker. The reason we do it this way is because if we were to mash in with black and chocolate malt or any kind of dark malt, even something like carafa or brown malt or roasted barley or anything like that, the darker the malt, the stronger the flavour it is, and it's going to overpower all the other flavours of the beer. You'll end up with more with a stout or something like that. So by putting the dark malt in at the end, you get a much better balance of flavours. In a dark lager, whether it's a German Schwarzbier or a Czech kind of like cherney dark beer, the dark malts are supposed to be subtle and they're supposed to be balanced to the other malty flavours and the hop flavours that you get. And this will ensure that it's balanced. What you can do is, if you try it this way and maybe you want a bit of a stronger dark malt flavour, you can either add in more dark malts, like more chocolate, more black malt, or you can add it in a bit earlier on, so maybe 5 minutes before the end of mash out or something like that. Then we're going to do the boil. I'm using 25 grams of magnum at the start of the boil, and I'm using 20 grams of Saaz 10 minutes before the end of the boil. And then this is all the same, so I'm going to cool down as I normally would with a heat exchange, and then I'm going to put it into my pressure fermenter. For the yeast, I'm using Saflager W-34 70, so it's going to be a bit drier than a Czech lager yeast is, but it's still going to be a really nice beer. And then this brings us on to the fermentation. We got to the end of the brew day and it's time for fermentation. So after doing the capping, I just carried on as I normally would. I did a 1 hour boil, adding in the magnum at the beginning of the boil and the Saaz towards the end. And then I cooled the wort down to 20 degrees. And after cooling it down, I transferred into my pressure fermenter. I let it fall from a height to try and aerate it, and then try and splash it around a bit. Try not to get any on the lid or outside the fermenter. Forgot to mention as well that I took a sample straight from the kettle into a trial jar just to get a reading, and my gravity was bang on 1052, which is what I was aiming for. And then back to the fermenter though, I put the lid on and I shook it around a bit more to try and aerate it. And then I pitch the yeast. Now, after pitching the yeast, I sealed the fermenter up and I took my gas from my Keyser, so just my regular CO2 gas, and I pressurized the fermenter to about 10 psi, between 10 and 15 psi or so, and then I attached a spunding valve. Now, again, don't do what I did here, which is attach the spunding valve to the liquid out. It should really go on the gas out. I then set the spunding valve to just over 10 psi, and I put it into my fermentation chamber set at 18 degrees, and after about 3-4 days I'm going to increase it to 20 degrees just to properly dry out the beer. So that's the brew done, we've got the fermentation started, and I will see you back here in a few days after the fermentation is done to see what it tastes like. Okay, so the beer is done fermenting, it's in my keg. It took about 17 days for it to fully ferment, and then I did a closed loop transfer into a keg, and then I've left it for a few days just to kind of settle before I do the final tasting, which we're going to do today. The fermentation itself went pretty well. It spent 4 days at 18 degrees, and then I increased the temperature to 20 degrees for the rest of the time. I didn't do a cold crash. I just couldn't really be bothered. I think that may have affected the colour, but let's look at how the beer has come out. So it's got very little head, like none at all on it, but I think that might be more of a carbonation issue. So I put this at about 12 psi, and I think proper carbonation is at around 15 psi, and it hasn't really had long enough to carbonate properly. It's kind of a brown colour in appearance, as opposed to black. Like, probably put a few more black dark malts in there. It looks a bit muddy, so a cold crash would have cleared it a bit better. It's actually looking better than it was when I first transferred it. On the nose, it's very grainy, and in getting some herbs from the hops. It's quite subtle overall. It's also got a bit of a rye bread aroma, quite bready. It's like, it is subtle, but what is there actually seems quite complex. The flavour though is really, really crisp. It's really clean, which is like amazing. Like, it's got that crisp, clean finish. It's got some bitterness there on the finish as well, but the main flavour is like everything that I wanted. It's bready, it's got some grainy flavours in there. It's got some subtle, like, dark fruits coming through, like blackberry and that sort of thing. Probably a bit more clean than a real Czech dark lager, but that's because I'm using a cleaner yeast. I could do this with a Bohemian Pils yeast and I would probably get more of the esters that I wanted, but I am so happy with how this came out. The mouthfeel as well is, as I said, very crisp, very clean. It's probably a light to medium, more on the side of medium. It's really good, and like, I've never pressure fermented a lager before. It has given me the qualities that I wanted in it, which is that crisp, clean flavour and mouthfeel. And the sort of dark malt flavours are there. They're subtle though, and it's actually like a really refreshing beer. And I could have quite a few of these. It's a bit stronger. The one that I made is a bit stronger than the average Czech dark lager. So this comes in at 4.84%, whereas normally they're sub 4%. This is great. It tastes a bit like a cross between a German Schwarzbier and a Czech dark lager. I will definitely try this again. I'll definitely try pressure fermenting lager again. And I will also try this specific beer with a Czech yeast and see how it comes out. I drank so much of this over the summer that it is nice to have something a bit different, but it's also nice to have something that throws back to sitting in the sun, drinking some really, really nice sessionable beer whilst listening to some excellent music. Anyway, do subscribe if you want to see more about pressure fermentation. Got some more pressure fermentation videos coming up. If you found this useful, please do give a like, and also comment below to let us know how you got on with your beers, if you've got any questions about this and about dark lager and pressure fermenting. And I also really like to hear your experiences with pressure fermenting lagers. So thanks very much.